Okay, great. So we're very happy to have Dr. Hecmarie Meléndez-Fernández. Hecmarie was born and raised in Puerto Rico, where she completed her undergraduate degree in integrative biology at the University of Puerto Rico. She then completed a postbac at Baylor College of Medicine and proceeded to work in various research institutions and earned her PhD in neuroscience. Her dissertation focused on understanding the effects of disrupted circadian rhythms on aortic endothelial function, metabolism, and sleep within the context of sex differences. Following her graduate work, she accepted a role at Eli Lilly, where she gained experience in clinical trial management, project portfolio management, medical content creation, and now serves as the clinical research scientist in the Global Patient Safety and Pharmacological Vigilance Department. Hecmarie is passionate about supporting people from underrepresented backgrounds in the sciences so they can achieve their maximum potential and career goals. In grad school, she developed a non-academic Careers in Science seminar series, where she hosted 10 PhDs for conversations about their career trajectories and current roles to broaden students' perspective of what they can be with a PhD. She has a long-standing history of leading and participating in outreach and service efforts, Cientifico Latino. She's actually a part of our junior board at Cientifico Latino. And knowing how important the support has been in her development, her motto is pay it forward. With that, definitely happy to have Hikmeti present and feel free to take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rob. And welcome to everyone. Once again, I'm very excited to be here with you guys. I know this is such an important part of our career journeys, trying to figure out what do we want to do and just learning about other different things. Before we start, I have to have a couple of disclaimers. So as Rob mentioned, I'm a volunteer with Cientifico Latino, and this presentation, even though I do work for a pharmaceutical company at this time, it is a reflection of my research, my experiences, and what I've learned while working. It is not necessarily a reflection of my employer, and the delivery of this presentation is in my personal volunteer capacity. Because I do work in the pharmaceutical industry and I've had the most experience there, many of the examples I will be using might use drugs as an example to illustrate points, but all the careers that I will be discussing today are applicable across the biotech industry, as well as some of them in the government and other sectors. And of course, these are by no means an exhaustive list of career paths. It's just really meant for you to start getting an idea of all the different avenues that you could potentially go down and just kind of scratch that curiosity for you. So feel free to keep engaging in the chat, but if you have any particular questions for me that we will discuss sometime in the middle of the presentation and at the end, please use the Q&A function. Well, let's get going. So I will first talk about some introduction, objectives, and why career exploration is important, a little bit about the industry, the scaling opportunities, and then jump into the meat of the presentation with the career landscape, talking about different areas where PhD scientists typically go into in the industry. And then I will move into tips into how to prepare starting now, and then we will close out with a Q&A session. So for the purposes of this presentation, I just want to create awareness, right? Understand what are the diverse career roles and the specific career tracks that are available to people with PhDs. Provide some tools to begin preparing earlier on in your career to facilitate and make that easier when you're actually in the job search, and facilitate actionable insights of how you all can prepare well in advance. So why career exploration? Some of us, many of us, come into graduate school thinking that we want to do research and we want to work in the academia and we want to go down the tenure track path. And a lot of us do go down that path. But some of us, sometime during our training, we realize that we might not necessarily align with the academic lifestyle, or we just want to do something a little bit different. And I just want to start this conversation by saying that that is absolutely fine. There are so many careers that we can all go down, and it's just a matter of fact of what resonates with you, with your style, what aspects of science do you enjoy engaging with most? If it's actually being at the bench and doing the science, or maybe writing about it, or thinking about how it applies in the broader scheme of things to potentially for patients or development of products, it's all up to you. So don't ever think that this career exploration piece is sort of a backup plan necessarily, or you couldn't make it in academia and then you have to find something else. No, just always keep your mind open. So it is a healthy and expected part of your graduate training. The more you know and the more you learn, the better informed decisions you can make. This is a safe space because we want all of you to be successful and to eventually get into the career spaces that you want and that are the most appropriate for what you, the kind of scientist that you are and the kind of life that you want to engage in. So just make sure to keep curious. The reality of non-academic careers is that a lot of the PhD scientists that earn their PhDs end up going outside academia. I'm sure most of you have seen those graphs of over the past, 10, 15 years where the PhDs awarded keeps increasing, but the academic roles are not increasing with them. And that's a product of how tenure works, right? So keep your minds open to other careers. And finally, exploring careers does not mean that you're tied into going into something different or that you have to make a decision now. It's just for the purpose of building awareness and being prepared. You can make the decision down the line once you have as much information as you need. So additionally, preparing is not the same as job hunting, right? Distinguishing these two is very important because the preparation piece involves exploring and gaining skills. And all of this can be done alongside your academic work, your research. Some of these activities that you can be doing that, again, don't necessarily differ or are significantly different from the skills that you gain in graduate school. It's like attending seminars, networking with alumni and learning about where people are at, understanding other spaces, casually reviewing job descriptions so you can start understanding what are what's the lingo that's being used, what are the skills that are important, and what are the skills that matter, and learning to understand what those are and potentially start incorporating those if you don't have them already, or trying to educate yourself, but also building that career literacy. Starting early will reduce a lot of stress, right? Because the more information you're gradually gaining, the better of a plan you can make by the time you're ready to make a decision of what you're doing after your PhD or your postdoc. However, if you're just starting now, that is completely fine. Starting at some point is better than not doing anything at all, right? So always think of this piece of career readiness and preparation and exploration as something that's cumulative. You're gaining information, you're preparing. It is an investment in your future. So it is not to be viewed as a distraction from your research, although some PIs might see it differently. So now we're going to go into some of the pathways that are built for PhDs. Starting off with the transition into industry. So why consider industry? Don't focus so much on the exact numbers because based on my research, these fluctuate a little bit, but focus more so on the magnitude, right? Pharma and biotech currently are about between 1.5 and 1.7 trillion of the market value. The jobs in the US just in these spaces, the biotech pharma CROs, about 4.7 million jobs, and about 65% of PhDs go into industry or other spaces other than academia. And of course, what people always ask, the compensation. It's typically ranges at least 2 to 5 times that of an academic uh, going straight out of graduate school or a postdoc. So industry also offers job stability, competitive compensation, including benefits like insurance, medical insurance. Some companies, depending on where you go, include other benefits like childcare, discounted childcare, or other aspects of health like fitness and other aspects that are beyond the scope of this presentation, but all of those things are things to consider when evaluating these opportunities. But even if you're academia bound and you know that that's what you want to do, understanding industry is valuable because most of the funding today has a translational component, right? So when we do research in the academic sector, it's not always just to understand why is the sky is blue or why does this mechanism, why is it the way it is? It usually has some sort of translatable or application or related to health, whether it be to humans or animals or improving some aspect of life and well-being. So keep that in mind as you move in within your research in the academic sector. So when we think of biotech and industry, and again, some of the examples will be focused on the pharmaceutical industry, but they are applicable across other sectors. These are some of the main career routes or paths that a PhD scientist can take, right? And we're going to go into some of these right now. So the research scientist, which is the position you're likely the most familiar with, is an industry or industry bench scientist, someone that is there doing the work on a day-to-day basis. They might be involved in executing experiments, and they're typically involved in the space of finding a drug target and in doing assay development, lead optimization to find molecules for those targets to move along into the early discovery and the preclinical space. They will usually move from the execution of animal models and taking it to humans and proof of concept to work. They also are involved in writing reports, patents, and contributing to IND filings or investigational new drug filings. They are hired by large pharma or pharma in general at all sizes of the industry, right? Because research is a core component of the development space. Biotech startups and mid-sized companies. I've placed some examples here, as well as CROs or contract research organizations, which are essentially third-party vendors that other companies might contract to do the work for them. And if anybody have questions about this, I'm happy to answer as well. But the advantage you bring in as a PhD scientist is that you're not there just for your hands to be pipetting and doing the science. You can also contribute to the design and the development of assays, of studies. You're able to move a little bit faster and more independently because you are already trained in identifying a hypothesis, identifying methods to test that hypothesis and move studies along. And from the get-go, because you have a PhD, because you have an implied degree of independence in terms of your capacity as a researcher, you are awarded that independence early on, which comes with varying levels of responsibilities and leadership positioning. As a research scientist, depending on your level of expertise prior to going into industry, you might come in as an individual contributor, which most people that coming straight from their PhD or their postdoc do. Essentially, this is a role in which you are doing the science, as I was just describing. So you're sort of proving yourself from that perspective in the industry. And with time, you can continue to move along the ranks as an individual contributor, or you can move into a management track. And again, don't pay too much attention of these examples of the role titles because they may vary a little bit, although they're pretty standardized. But the idea is that you move from different levels as a scientist and you gain different levels of responsibility. So maybe you start off doing the experiments and designing experiments. You might get a little bit more responsibilities. Maybe you're training other employees that are more junior to you, or you get bigger roles in designing experiments that are going to test specific hypotheses or target molecules. So just something to think about. When we consider a startup versus a pharma, established pharma, or a biotech that's, again, also established, it might vary in terms of responsibilities. Not necessarily one is better than the other, but in a bigger company, you might have very defined roles and responsibilities. Your scope is very narrow. You are there to do the research and do the work. In a startup, maybe, or a smaller company, you may play more roles. You might be a little bit more stretched, but you're learning a lot more, right? You have to learn and be able to perform in terms of your science, but you might also be learning a little bit more about regulatory space early on, or how are we thinking about the business development for this molecule that I'm working in the lab. So it's just something to consider. An example of this would be PhD student joining X company as a research scientist in antibody engineering. Within 3 to 5 years, they've been building up their expertise, not only in the science, but also in translating the science to the regulatory space. And they are involved in designing the preclinical experiments for that new drug filing. And for those of you who don't know, when a new drug is going to start being tested in clinical trial space, it has to provide a package to FDA, for instance, or the EMEA in Europe, so regulatory bodies, with the package of data that shows the efficacy of those drugs in these preclinical studies or or studies with animals, to be able to then move on to clinical trials. So comparing a research scientist in an academic sector versus maybe in biotech or pharmaceutical industry, the development of a drug or a product, it could be a product used like a CPAP machine or something like that. You want to develop that product to get it to patient versus a publication. Now, that's not saying that you don't want to publish, because absolutely our research scientists do publish. It's just a little bit different of the primary goals and the timelines in which these are developed. And you also work in a very highly cross-functional team. So then we also have the translational medicine and early development space. So these folks are still doing science, but maybe are a little bit more advanced in terms of the strategy that they're developing. So they're trying to connect the dots between the preclinical data, and now we have a molecule that targets a specific disease state or something that we want to move into development. What are the biomarkers that we're going to be targeting in humans? What are we going to be looking at in our clinical trials? So these scientists are in charge of moving that molecule from animal studies to first in human studies. They are involved in designing those biomarker strategies. They're defining the patient criteria who are going to be eligible for these trials, and are involved in interpreting early efficacy and PK/PD data. These are some typical roles. So clinical pharmacologist, pharmacometrician, biomarker scientist, etc. And PhDs excel in this space because the role requires mastery of both that biology, or like generally speaking, the science, and the clinical thinking. So what are we thinking about the patients? How do we ensure that the patients are appropriately being considered in the development of these trials? So, an example would be an immunology PhD student joining a company's early development team, which they design phase 1 or 2 dose escalation studies. So phase one is basically preclinical, and they are doing this for a novel checkpoint inhibitor with developing with a biomarker strategy. So then we keep moving along the pipeline development. So we move to the clinical development space. And I won't belabor these um, phases too much, but all you need to know is the first 2 types of trials, phase 1 and phase 2, ensure that the drug is safe in healthy volunteers, that the drug does what it's intended in patients who actually have the condition in the phase 2. And then as we move on to phase 3, these clinical trials get much bigger because, of course, we need a much bigger patient population to be able to achieve the statistical significance that we need to appropriately test the medications. And then phase 4 are studies that happen after the drug has been approved. But of course, because in clinical trials, there's always the limitation of numbers or geographies for certain populations. So we want to be able to continue to track and study what are these medications doing in a much broader population, maybe population who have other concurrent diseases or are taking other medications. So how does that all work? So as you can imagine, there are multiple roles in this space. So you can work as a clinical scientist. So that would be someone who reviews data, then write protocols, interprets the results. Or you can work in the pharmacovigilance space, which are the people that are involved in monitoring safety reports. So they see adverse events, and we'll talk about this a little bit in a couple more minutes. We can be a clinical project manager. So you would be the hub of the clinical trial teams, ensuring that timelines, budget, site management is in place, working with the different sites to ensure that they have the appropriate protocols and materials and they are following regulatory rules. You can work as a regulatory medical writer. So write the case safety reports, the investigator brochures, to the investigators in clinical trials about has been collected up until that point, as well as other information. Example here would be a neuroscientist joining company. They work as a clinical scientist and calls, work with biostatisticians on endpoint design. And over 5 years, they move into a high pen or a diabetes pen. How do they ensure that the trial design is appropriate and for the indication and the patient population in which this is aimed or geared towards? And importantly, they ensure that the language used is the language that's appropriate for these regulatory bodies and that will be in the labeling, the product inserts that will be in the market eventually. We also have the CMC regulatory folks. So CMC is chemistry, manufacturing, and controls. These are the people that ensure that drug product specifications and the manufacturing processes meet regulatory standards and go according to exactly the protocols. It is a very detail-oriented and process-driven space, and it has to ensure that this happens in a very strict and standardized manner all the time. You can also go into the labeling space where you write and negotiate the drug labels with the regulatory bodies. Um, Here you might interact a lot with law counterparts just to understand and make sure that everything is according to regulatory body, not only in the US or the country in which it is being carried out, but everywhere that will be able to receive that product. And finally, another space is the regulatory intelligence. So these people are charged with monitoring the regulatory landscape, again, globally or wherever the product is going to be launched, to understand policy shifts, guidances, or anything that might affect how the product or medication will be received, because this might have implications on how that development pipeline continues to move forward. For instance, if you heard recently the most favored nation laws and all of that stuff, that changes how the strategy of some organizations might, what they might focus on in terms of countries where they're going to be released based on these new rulings from the government. Um, then we move on to pharmacovigilance and drug safety space, which is also an area that I think not a lot of people will initially think about it, because it's not something that is necessarily super advertised or well known, but it's one of the areas that it's so important because these folks are the ones that are tasked with keeping track of any potential adverse events or side effects that medications would have. Of course, as you can imagine, this happens early in the discovery space and in the clinical trials because that is those information are what ultimately is taken into the FDA or other regulatory bodies to approve medications and products or devices. But also, this has to be carried out post-marketing to ensure that the broader population continues to be safe and we understand any other potential unintended or unexpected side effects. So within this space, there are multiple roles. They have varying degrees of involvement in the review of adverse events. So for instance, in the first box, the individual case safety reports, these are folks who are reviewing cases to understand what are these side effects or adverse events? Are they serious or not? Are they related to the drug or the device that the patient used? And if any particular signals are of concern, communicating this in a timely manner to regulatory bodies and doing whatever needs to be done to ensure the patients are safety. And then we have some of the signal detection and evaluation colleagues who look at the broad picture. So kind of zooming out of these individual case safety reports and saying, okay, what are we seeing? Are there any patterns? Are there any signals here that we need to report? And variations of previous rules that we've talked about. Because the other thing is, and I forgot to mention this early, in biotech and pharma, this is a very highly cross-functional space. So you're never really working in an isolated manner. You're always working with people in either regulatory or medical because you're writing documents, you're producing, but you're also working with your scientists because they're the ones producing the data, working with your biostatisticians to analyze. So it is a very cross-functional space. So that way, for that reason, you'll notice that some of the job descriptions or slight descriptions are a little bit they're similar in some aspects or have a cross relation to each other. And this is one of those spaces where if you are able to really understand this space, it is such a good foundation moving into other areas of the industry because being in pharmacovigilance and drug safety space, you're able to learn a lot, not only about the science and the early discovery, but laws and regulations that apply across the span of the pipeline. So again, from early discovery to post-marketing. So all of that knowledge is very valuable across the industry. Then we move on to our biostatistics and bioinformatics data science friends. This is a very hot area. A&M and ML and drug discovery and development are definitely not a hype. Companies are highly building an entire departments around this. They're hiring a lot of people for this. So if you have computational skills or interested in developing them, it is definitely worth your time. So some of the roles here would be working as a biostatistician, designing trials, and from the perspective of what is the data that we need? What are the metrics that we're looking for? What are the numbers of patients or populations that we need to test this in to be able to make an informed, statistically sound analyses? We can also go into clinical data scientist roles where they're building models using all the information that they have from previous previous trials that they've collected in the current trial and try to extrapolate information and gain information from technology to make better informed decisions in terms of how we're designing next steps of trials or where we want to go in terms of molecule design, etc. Yep, the computational biologist kind of goes along with that same process. So this is not my space, so pardon me for my limited knowledge here, but they can do things such as modeling types of proteins, molecules, how they would work in specific areas of your body and incorporate into certain mechanisms to sort of get that idea or modeling of how it would work to be able to do some pre-screenings of molecules and other similar work. Skills in this space that get you hired or that are relevant are knowing any of these line items here. So coding, R, Python, experience with genomic data, so NGS or single cell sequencing, machine learning, all of these other things. If you have expertise in this phase or have the capacity to learn, these are areas that are highly marketable at this time. So even non-computational PhDs can certainly pivot to learning some of this and move into the space. I personally have met people who've done this same thing, are not related. Their background is not necessarily comp sci or bioinformatics, but they self-taught and now they're working in this space. So it's something that is certainly possible. So then we move into the quality and manufacturing. So this might be a less glamorous and certainly one of the lesser considerate aspects of the development space, but it's also a very crucial piece because every product that reaches a patient, whether it be a device, something that you consume, a medication, everything has gone through this quality assurance system. So they are people that work on good manufacturing practices. So they ensure that anything that's being manufactured and that's going to be taken in by humans or other animals is done in a very systematic way, always in the same manner. If there are issues with any products, they're the quality assurance role are the people that are involved in determining what happened. They do audits. They go into the corrective and preventative actions and do the root cause investigations. This is also a very good space for people with PhDs or strong scientific backgrounds, maybe engineers, because you understand the process and then are able to poke and prod to understand what went wrong, what happened to derail the system if that's what happened. Quality control, it's the analytical testing of drugs and substances and confirm the specifications are made. So the people working in this space are typically more lab-based, so they are on the floor day to day, moving through batches of whatever product is being made. And then the CMC, or the process development folks, these are people who optimize the manufacturing process. Roles in this space are often held by people with chemistry or biochemistry, chemical engineering degrees. But my experience has been that if you have enough of a passion for a space and a decent enough background, people are very willing to teach you. So don't let a disadjusted backgrounds deter you if this is an area that interests you. So if you have experience in protein expression, cell culture, analytical chemistry, formulation, these might be jobs that might be interesting to you because those skills are directly translatable to this space. And then we're moving on to a space that maybe most of us are more familiar with, the medical writing. So there are so many different types of writing in the industry. One of them has been the regulatory writing, which we've somewhat discussed in previous roles. But you can also do the publication writing, which is very similar to the roles that we do as graduates and postdocs in academia. So writing manuscripts for journals, conference abstracts, and presentations. We also do systematic reviews of the literature and meta-analyses. We work with publications with the steering committees of the clinical trials or other studies that we're doing. And the publication writing people can either be working directly with the company or they can be contracted out through MedCom's agencies. So those are agencies that focus specifically and uniquely in those spaces, but contract out their employees to do those types of work. More broadly, scientific communication. So some of these might work in the conference strategy and abstract development. So what is a message that we want to send to the public? What kind of people do we want to attract to work, collaborate with us? Those are the people that are involved with this type of roles. They also support the communications with roles like MSLs, which we'll see in a minute. And what is the commercial messaging? What is the messaging that's going to be put out to, whether it be the general public or if you're working with healthcare providers or other professionals, the message that comes out of related to our work or related to disease states, et cetera. And then there's the medical education content writing. So these are people that are involved in the content education for whether it be HCPs or other professionals. They create slide decks for speaker bureaus. So when companies want to educate on a disease state or, for instance, like a medication and the information that's currently available through the clinical development of that medication, those people are the ones that create those slide decks, as well as patient education. So you have to have a breadth of being able to speak to very highly educated people with a lot of background knowledge on what you're talking about, but also be able to put things in a very simple language where the lay public can understand. And as I already alluded to, right, we're all as PhD folks, you already have a very strong background in that because that's what you're practicing every day, developing hypotheses, being able to write a properly justified reasoning about your hypothesis, testing and writing articles. So you don't necessarily need that prior experience because you already have a lot of the information. You just need that ability to communicate the complex science, which you're building right now. And within the medical affairs space, there's also the medical science liaisons or MSLs, which is a very popular career transition for PhDs. MSLs are people who engage with healthcare providers or other scientific professionals, and it's their job is to build relationships, to educate on disease states if needed, to communicate and bring information in from the key opinion leaders or the healthcare providers into their company and understand what is going on in the space, um, learn about new treatments, but also educate to healthcare providers on new treatments, trial designs, and data. Sometimes HCPs don't have the time to sit down and research what are the clinical trials that are happening right now? What is the information on molecule XYZ? These personnel are the ones that are doing this. MSLs, importantly, are not salespeople. They don't have anything really to do with medications or any products. They're just people that are talking to professionals about the science and about the clinical aspects. Um, these people typically tend to have PhDs in the life sciences. So it could be neuroscience, oncology, a background in cell biology, just people that are able to read a scientific paper, distill information, and clearly have a very have a clear conversation with other professionals about the science and be able to understand and be able to explain and answer questions about all of this. And then finally, I will speed it up here a little bit, but this last space is the commercial strategy and business. So for some of these, well, none of these you really need additional degrees, although MBAs, some people pursue MBAs or JDs to go a little bit deeper into the space. But some of the roles that PhDs straight out of grad school or postdoc can gain or can go into are the program management roles or the market access and HEOR. Program management, it could mean a lot of different things depending on which specific function or organization within a company you're working on, but it could be a program management of a molecule. So you're in charge of the strategy, moving that molecule from the discovery space into the clinics. It could be being a program manager, or it could be some variation of program management in the medical affairs space, potentially leading a healthcare provider education campaign. So if, let's say, you are leading the campaign for Alzheimer's, you are responsible for developing materials that appropriately educate on Alzheimer's disease and medications or treatments that are available. And it's worth mentioning that these people in this space have to produce well and balanced information. So it's not necessarily just about the company you represent. You communicate what all is out there and available to the healthcare provider. So it's an unbiased type of role. HEOR is health economics and outreach research. So this is a space that continues to do research after a drug is marketed or a device is marketed, and to better understand the implications. So they're collecting real world data of what's happening to patients that are taking those medications or using those devices. They build evidence that supports the payer coverage for reimbursement, and other types of studies like epidemiological studies. Very interesting space. And then business development and licensing, you work to evaluate compounds from other companies or organizations that your company might want to bring in. among other responsibilities. And then there similarly other spaces like management consulting. So there's many companies. If you look up management consulting, some of these are very famous. And these companies, what they do is they are contracted out to different organizations focused on specific aspects. So in your case, if you're a life sciences PhD, you would likely work in a healthcare space and provide support there. It is a little bit hard to get into, but it is highly rewarding. And I know our program, Cientifico Latino, has had a consulting uh, program support in the past. So if that's something that you're interested in, you might want to check that out. Venture capital, I'm sure everybody is familiar with that. So I'll just kind of move along. And then the competitive intelligence space is a space where people with highly specialized backgrounds in different fields are continuing to track what is out there in the environment, what other companies are doing, what the pipeline development looks like, and provide recommendations to the company for what to do next, or strategic, they explain or communicate strategic implications of what the environment is doing, whether that be other companies, whether it be changing laws or policies, and how that might affect their company's strategy moving forward. For some of these, MBAs are favored, but they're not required. Do we have any questions so far?
Yeah, feel free to ask questions through the Q&A function before going into section 2 or similarly in the chat.
I don't think I see any questions so far.
We have one Hecmarie from Eski. Does going to an industry job after a postdoc have advantages, or do you become overqualified and find it hard to get hired?
Um, Hard to get. Oh, no, no, no. If I'm understanding this correctly, let me. Sorry. Um, is that in the Q&A? Maybe I didn't see
Yeah,
it.
it's in the
Oh,
Q&A.
oh, perfect. I see it now. Because I haven't going into after by that. No, no, absolutely not. If I'm understanding this question correctly, is basically you're asking, does having a postdoc overqualify you? And Ansky, let me know if I misunderstood your question. Um, no, absolutely not. Some in industry, you can be hired straight out of your PhD, or you can be hired after your postdoc. Some people also, um, some companies have industry postdocs, if that's something you haven't considered, where you're typically hired for roughly 2 years to develop some sort of project and work on something that the company might be interested in. And then after there, you can either continue to apply within the company for open roles, or you can move on. But no, that does not make you overqualified, or I don't think it necessarily has a a bearing on the position you're trying to or you can get. I've met many scientists who come into industry with a postdoc and go straight into a role. Some people from academia have a postdoc and do a postdoc in industry and then continue to work in industry. And then I've met people who just come in straight from graduate school and start their research scientist career without having any sort of formal postdoc experience. So that is definitely possible.
Great. Thank you, Hecmarie. We have a couple
Yep.
more that are combined.
Okay. Yep. I'm
Uh,
seeing those.
okay, great.
Per-
So do you need to start in a wet lab site, or can you go directly into QA or other admin jobs after a PhD or a postdoc?
No, you don't necessarily have to go into any particular career path first. You don't need to go into like a lab space to move into another space after. there are definitely um, certain areas, and based on conversations with fellow colleagues in other spaces, that might prefer you having industry bench experience, but it's not necessarily.
Great. And then just the last two. So Andres says, in your experience, how easy is it to move between departments? And then what is the difference between a project manager and a principal scientist as a PhD in industry?
Okay. Um, easy to, regarding the question about being easy to move across departments, my experience and what I've observed at the company I work for, it's, it is, I don't know if I want to use the term easy or hard, but it's certainly something people do a lot. As a matter of fact, that's one of the things that encouraged me to stay where I'm at in terms of the company I work for, because I've talked to so many professionals where you see them being at the company for, 25, 30 years, but they've had five, six different types of mini careers is what they call them, right? So they work in one space first and then they move to something else. So yes, that is something that's definitely possible. And now I've seen it be even more encouraged because you bring a diversity of perspectives and yeah, just different perspectives having worked in different areas. If you guys don't mind, I'm just going to quickly go through the next section and then I will answer these questions. Okay, so I'll move pretty quickly. First tip is a master resume or CV. If you don't have this, you got to start today. This is a document that you keep with absolutely everything you have done, whether it be skills you have, courses you've taught, publications, jobs or roles that you've held. Write everything down with as much detail as possible. This is something that you're never going to send out to any particular professional or any individual person, but think about it as like the book where you keep everything, like your journal, so to speak. Whenever you go to apply to a particular role, then you take that and you remove what does not apply, you keep what applies, and you can use AI technology to compare a job description for a role that you're interested in with your resume, and it'll help you appropriately match this. By the way, I'm happy to send these slides to Rob and Cientifico Latino and share with people in the today present. So don't worry about that if we don't get through everything. Um, so yes, I'll just leave it at that for the purposes of time. So I know some of us don't really feel comfortable sometimes with the networking piece, or you feel kind of like, oh, just I don't want to feel like I am just talking to someone to get something out of it. But you just have to reframe the way you think about it. You're not asking for favors, but you're just trying to get information from people who know things that you don't. So what is networking? You got to think about networking as learning. You learn about people, you learn about their roles, careers, opportunities, and their needs. Simple conversations, they don't need to have an end goal in mind. You just focus on learning and having a conversation being the keyword, right? Like not an interrogation. You're exchanging insights, support, opportunities, and you're indirectly creating a group of advisors and potential support for you for the future. You build your network strategically. Start with LinkedIn and the people that you know. Start looking around to identify people that might be interesting or have interesting roles to you. Engage with their posts, comment. This kind of creates a indirect rapport with people, and they're more willing to engage with you at the time that you're looking to reach out and maybe have a conversation. You can do this as well at conferences, career events. Talk to the vendors, industry personnel, ask questions. You're at a great position as a graduate student because people don't judge you too much for all the questions you ask. They're actually very welcoming. So ask all the questions. This is an example of your LinkedIn post or a LinkedIn headline. The idea is to be specific about what you have in your post. Um, and this is also a quick LinkedIn message as an example, but what I would recommend when you email or send a message through LinkedIn, start if you don't know the person, start with a quick commonality or compliment. Hey, Rob, I know we both worked at NYU in however long ago or whatever it is, or I'm now a PhD student at NYU. I know you worked there. So that you establish some sort of connection. Then you briefly introduce yourself, right? I'm a current graduate student in neuroscience. I'm working on XYZ. And then be specific. I would like to talk to you if you have a chance because I want to learn about your work in XYZ. Very clear, direct, easy. Then conduct those informational interviews. So once someone is willing to talk to you, spend 15-30 minute conversation, whatever time they're willing to provide to you, to learn about what their role is really like. Learn about ways to prepare for roles like theirs, what to expect, understand how professionals in those spaces are thinking. So then you can start reframing the way you think or learning how to talk to people in those spaces in a similar fashion. For the informational interviews, always, always, always research the person. Don't ask questions that are easily Googleable, right? When you reach out to them and when you meet with them face to face, be clear about your purpose. Know, like, be able to tell them, like, I'm interested in talking to you for this or that reason. Prepare by coming up with questions that are very specific, not tell me about a day in the life or something super general. Ask about the career paths and not jobs or role specific, right? You want to understand the general space rather than can you give me a job? Other things that you might consider talking about, developments in their fields. What are things that are interesting right now, or what are things that might be going on in the environment that are affecting their field? So you can start learning about things to look out for in the news or in the environment or journals or whatever that you can connect to with people in that space. And always ask up if you can follow up. And if they're open to that, please do so. It is always very nice just receiving a thank you note like, hey, I appreciate it talking to you on Friday. Thank you for telling me about XYZ. Mention something distinct about your conversation. That not only shows that you are grateful for their time, but that you are actually paying attention, taking notes, that you put the time to work on to listen to what they were talking about. And don't come unprepared. Don't be vague. Treat it as an interrogation or ask for a referral role like off the bat. Other opportunities, and I know we're almost at time, and I apologize for going a little bit over. If you guys don't mind going a few more minutes, pursue an industry internships if that's something that's available to you or possible. Many companies have these. They typically recruit almost a year before, so they typically recruit over in the fall. And for undergrads, typically the summers are when the internships are conducted. But for graduate students, some companies only do summer, some companies do across, the entirety of the year. So it just depends on where you're applying. So you have to do that piece of research. But always keep in mind that it's at least 6 months of that whole application, interview, acceptance process. When you're talking to your PI about this, come to them with a plan, right? Don't just say, hey, I want to go on an internship. Come with them a plan of, okay, this is where my experiments are going to be by June when I anticipate going to my internship. This is my stopping point. This is what I'll be doing during my internship. When I come back, I'm going to start analyzing XYZ. So basically, so they know that you've thought about the whole experience rather than you're just doing things on a whim. This will also give them a little bit more certainty that you have thought things through, that you know what you're doing, what you're getting yourself into, and that you're not just going to come back kind of like with chicken with their head cut off, not knowing what's going on in your work. Because after you've been gone for, 2, 3, 4 months for an internship, you get really unplugged or can really get unplugged. So keep that in mind. Other ideas to develop skills, online certifications through societies, like for instance, Society for Neuroscience or the ACS for chemistry, LinkedIn Learning, Coursera courses, stuff like that. You can get involved with your department or your PI in grant writing or other writing support, so you can strengthen those skills. Develop your scientific communication skills, and I'll kind of just skip through this, but make sure you know how to write, present, and presenting at different levels, right? Develop your elevator speech for someone who's a scientist and highly educated. Develop something for people, maybe peers or educated people, but not people in your field. Excuse me. As well as for lay public. So you're able to move across levels of understanding, but still deliver your message. Um, Continue to develop all of these transferable skills that we've discussed. Be intentional with your PhD choices, whether those be rotations or courses, like extracurricular courses that you take. Publications. If you are able to work as a guest, what do they call it? A freelance writer for some sort of society. For instance, I did that for ASBMB. Do that. Get your name out there. Get experience under your belt. Build your portfolio. And when it comes to the postdoc, have those conversations early on, right? Have the conversations with your PI early on. Have them multiple times. Ask a lot of questions and have an ongoing conversation about what you're willing to do, what you want to do, and just keep it open. I'm going to just skip through that and go into questions now. Again, I'm happy to send this over so you can have it if you're interested in. So thank you so much, everyone.
Great. Thank you so much, Hecmarie, for this very insightful webinar. We have several questions. I do want to be mindful of your time. So, if there's a hard stop, just feel free to let me know. But one of the questions that we have is, do you believe getting a PhD is necessary to land a job in industry?
That's a tricky question. And I would say it's a conversation rather than an answer, yes, no. But realistically, you don't need a PhD to land the job. Answering literally verbatim what you have in your question, you don't. I have many colleagues that came straight out of their bachelor's. Some people came straight out of their master's. So now you have to consider a PhD individual versus a bachelor's individual are not going to come into industry at the same level. So a PhD person is going to have a higher role, higher responsibilities, which obviously also comes with a different package for compensation, different responsibilities. If you're interested in having this conversation, I'm happy to have that offline with you. But you absolutely not. I think it's a person by person decision that you have to make. Why do you want to have a PhD? What will a PhD get you that a bachelor's doesn't? And I think it just depends on what types of roles you're aiming for and how quickly do you want to get there. Do you want to have a leadership position? At what level of leadership position do you want to have? So there's a lot of factors to go into that.
Great. And I think I'll probably ask two questions in the interest of time. What kind of opportunities are available for PhD students interested in program management slash patent law? And on that note, where do you have an idea of like the salary ranges and benefits?
Okay. Yeah. Program management, there are lots of courses online. You can start with free, like LinkedIn Learning, Coursera. If you're currently enrolled in an institution, a lot of the times those schools have memberships to different resources like these, like LinkedIn Learning, Coursera, and you can start there. There's also more advanced program management or project management courses that you can then get a proper certification for. Um, and then the patent law, you would also have to work with either a patent office, again, at the organization you work for, because some universities actually have a patent law office, or in the biotech industry, they would start training you and then you can sit for their certifications. Like there's exams and stuff. So, but you can look that up online. It might slightly vary by state. I don't know necessarily those details. Um, but those are things that you certainly can do as a graduate student or even as an undergrad. I have a friend from grad school who finished their PhD and started working in the patent office of the school. He got really into it, really enjoyed it. So he became a patent agent, which has a distinction, and I should mention that right now. You're not a lawyer, patent lawyer, you're a patent agent, and you don't need a law degree for that. And that's what he did. He really enjoyed it, started working there. Eventually, he really, really wanted to get into it and wanted to go for his patent law. So he went into law school and just graduated last year. So it's something that you can do again, at different levels of education. And then you mentioned the compensation. There are many websites. Indeed, Glassdoor have certain things. If you go to the career pages of the companies, for instance, at Lilly, we have a Lilly careers page where they post all of their roles. They typically have salary ranges posted. And I can't recall the level of detail for the full compensation package. For instance, like if they mention what kinds of insurance and like fitness level benefits, etc. But I definitely know that the your base pay is posted on the rolls, and I'm sure other companies have similar things like that.
And then just a final question in the interest of time. What would you say, how can you translate your resume, academic resume to leap into the biotech industry?
Um, Again, this is not a very straightforward question. Um, you have to start learning a little bit of the language for where you're applying to. So if it might be a little bit different if you're applying to like a food sciences space versus a health focused pharma industry. But in general, when my HR colleagues have emphasized, they want to see quantification. So if you, let's say, if you're working as in grad school, right? You're working as a officer for your graduate student association. Don't just say like you put together an event. Write it something along the lines of organized an event serving 200 graduate students with a budget of $10,000. And so basically, so they can see the person reading your document, your resume, they can see the impact. So always measure as much as you can, put numbers to things. You taught a class of 20 students for 3 months. That's something that they can see, okay, you had to prepare. Um, Again, feel free to reach out to me. Actually, That is my LinkedIn. The QR code takes you to my LinkedIn if you're interested in connecting. Happy to answer questions there as well.
Great. With that, thank you everyone for coming. We definitely really appreciate your time, Hecmarie. This was extremely insightful. And we wish you all the best in your pathways to non-academic careers. And feel free to stay tuned for a couple webinars coming up on scientific policy. Great. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.